Episode of The Yield. Be sure to like and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube, and leave a review if you're enjoying the content. In case we haven't met before, I'm your host, Peter Kerr, and I'm the Director of Product Marketing here at Yieldtree. Today, I'm joined by Francis Wenzel, who is the CEO and co-founder of TickSmith, a true fintech software company that combines cutting-edge technology and deep knowledge in capital markets to reach new summits of innovation. Francis, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, we're excited. You're joining us from just north of the border, huh?
Absolutely, where it has been freezing for a while now. So I'm calling in from beautiful and sunny Montreal.
I think your weather tends to lead us by a few weeks or so. So we are not excited for that cold front to come in during the winter.
Well, it comes back every year.
We thought maybe to start the show, perhaps you can walk everyone through your background and also maybe some of the exciting things going on at TickSmith.
Sure. So I have started data distribution and starting working with technology. The first startup was literally in the mid 80s when I was still in high school, and created software to do financial data charting. Literally mailed out floppy disks with market data to be able to feed the charting engines. The portfolio management software became involved here in a firm that built a retail online trading platform that ended up being used by all the banks in Canada. So if in the late 90s, if you were trading personally on Schwab Canada or TD or BMO's applications that use our technology, and we were acquired by at the time Fortune 500 called SunGard. I stayed there till 2011 and ultimately did the product management for all the data products globally, and anything from real-time feeds, time series databases, data aggregation, selling all segments of capital markets, and saw a common problem that people had in dealing with large amounts of data and in distributing content. And said, you know what, hey, we can tackle that. So left SunGard, got a crew together and with people I'd worked with before, and that's how we started TickSmith. It was the idea. And we've evolved a lot since then. You described us as cutting edge fintech, and it's actually, that is evolving as well. The best description for TickSmith that I've heard recently was that we are literally enterprise software masquerading as fintech. And it is the case because the problem we're solving is not limited just to financial institutions.
And then, so you know, just to kind of summarize, generally speaking, what the company does is you all, aggregate this data and actually provide the data itself, or you just help connect people who have the data with those who are seeking the data?
Neither nor. So firms have data, and data is valuable. I mean, I don't know how often you've heard in the past that the most valuable asset you have is data. That's led into a whole lot of like data lake projects and centralization, and how can we exploit the data best. And I like to say that the best way to show that data is valuable is to actually sell it. I mean, if you can get some dollars for your data, it really shows the value not only to your firm, but also to firms externally. So what we do is, if a firm or company has some data, we provide a enterprise SaaS solution. So it's a solution simple to implement. It connects to the data, so the data stays with the company that owns the data. Our solution connects to it, can do all the transformation to turn that into data products that can be files, it can be elements, and it can be any type of data. There's no restriction to just financial data. And once it has been transformed into a data product, then you can present that data product into a web store. Literally, here's a list of all the data available. Here's how much it costs. Here's how much data it is. And an end user can go discover the data, click on it, say, I want to buy this, go through the full transaction, and then the system also takes care of delivering the data to the customer and managing things like subscriptions and updates. Very, very simply, imagine a complete out-of-the-box solution that makes showing data and making it available as simply as if you were shopping for any item on any e-commerce site like Amazon.ca or Walmart or any other place.
So I guess the first question that comes up is just around data privacy, right? So I'm sure a lot of people listening are a little bit curious to understand that some data is certainly shared by companies that own the data, that with the customers that input the data to that company. Maybe you could walk through the data privacy concerns.
Absolutely. So first of all, it's like, why do you want to sell data, or why do you want to distribute data? We have two basic use cases. The first one is, I'll go by order of importance, is what we call the concept of white room. Once you have a neutral application or a neutral system like this, we have, for example, banks that are using our solution to share data amongst themselves, transform it in some other ways, and then it feeds applications that they'll have in-house. Right? And that's the concept of the clean room for data. The second is internal data distribution. So it's great that all of the companies go and say, we finally have our data in one place. We finally have control of our data. And if somebody in company wants access to data, well, what do? They need to call up the admins and say, I'm looking for this type of data. Do we have it? Yes, no. How can I get access to it? So imagine, put a store in front of it. Here is the list of data available, and then here's how you want to use it because you're doing investment banking at a bank, you're part of that division, you need some of the data sets that are used by another division. You actually see what's there, see the details, and have an easy way to ask for it, connect to it, and then start using it. And then the third is selling data. So the data privacy aspect actually starts first with the data owners. Like, what data do you want to sell? And just to make sure, the whole concept of packaging data products is exactly to ensure that you don't have any data privacy issues. Right? I'm a company that has data related to travel. Well, I might not want to go and say, here, let me sell travel reports, but I might want to package my data to say, here is an aggregate that shows travels between point A and point B or point C, peaks in time, and I can package these products, and those not only have value to others, but they will not be a competitive advantage that I'm giving away to somebody else to compete against my business. And I'm making sure also, as the owner of the data, that only the data that I want to make available out there is the data that I'm offering.
And you mentioned to start that the company's roots were first sort of aggregating and providing these high level directional data points to capital markets. Well, why are the capital markets so interested in such data?
Well, finance is driven by data. And if you look, what's a stock exchange? It's a place where people come in, go and pitch data, which is, I want to buy this or I want to sell this. That data gets distributed around, transactions are done, which generates more data. And then the resulting content has tremendous value, and financial institutions have to use data as part of their day-to-day activities. So it's a logical place to start, especially since it's a background of the founders, and my background is all with financial applications and financial data. That's a great place where there's enough problems to be solved that we can make a living selling solutions. But that is evolving, and it's now not just capital markets that realize the value of content. If you look at the computer revolution that we're going through right now, what are the big buzzwords? Cloud, AI, machine learning. What does it really mean? Well, it means that it's now cheaper than ever to actually own data and store it somewhere. It's cheaper than ever to do any type of computing. Because of that, you can now look at computing intensive applications like AI and machine learning to help you if you're in finance with doing some investment models and validating some theses and estimating that. But if you're not in finance, nothing stops you from saying, you know what, if I can refine my processes, if I can find some patterns that can help me sell more of my products, produce cheaper, well, AI and machine learning is now available to me too, and I can do that. But to be able to do it properly, I might need to get data from the outside. Right? Again, I'm the travel company, and I'm trying to figure out how to better my schedules. And well, what's the impact of weather? Oh, guess what? I need to go and buy weather data from somebody. What's the impact of changes in regulations and travel regulations? I might want to get some of those data sets because they could have an impact on my business, and I can model all of that with the AI and machine learning. So the need to go and acquire data is becoming stronger and stronger. But we've seen that prior to that in capital markets where firms were buying and selling data. Then you have, I'm sure you probably had a number of guests talk to you about what they're doing with alternative data. And if for the auditors, alternative data is data that can be used when you do models, but it's not traditional financial data. Right? There's one firm that the typical example we hear about is the firm that takes satellite images of parking lots of large retailers and then compares those and creates time series and to say, here, this is how many visits in each of the stores have happened. Well, if you have some of that content, you can include that in an investment thesis, but it's not traditional financial data. And the demand for alternative data has moved outside of just capital markets and hedge funds and the buy side looking for this type of content for their models.
You mentioned the buy side, and I know there are many other practical use cases, but the capital markets one is always one that I think is often most interesting. But the buy side, capital markets, they seek out informational advantages primarily for profit, right?
Yes.
So that inherently leads to probably some misuses of data. So maybe you could walk through a little bit of what are some of the pitfalls that have happened kind of in this space that maybe you guys are trying to correct. Meaning, obviously, there are data leaks. There's misuse of data. Maybe what are some of those concerns?
I think there's not that many concerns. What you want is you want to make sure you know who you're selling your data to. You want to have all of your IP protected through whatever contract or agreement or rules that have to be accepted by somebody that has the data. You want to have audit rights, again, as the owner of the IP. But to simplify and ensure the data just doesn't start traveling willy-nilly, ultimately, if somebody buys some data, they buy it because they have a use case. And if you can get the data back to them where it's going to be easy to integrate in their systems, there's less chances of data leakage. There is one new big trend, though, which is super exciting, which we're part of, which makes it even more exciting, at least for us, which is the whole concept of data sharing and data rental. Right? I don't know if it's a topic that has come up before, but you have new players in the data field, firms like Snowflake, for example, okay? And great success with their IPO and where they're at. Another firm is Databricks. And these firms use the latest big data technology to make data available to an end user. But when you're accessing the data and when you're working with it, the data itself can still stay on the side of the firm that owns the data and produces the data. And that is opening up a whole new realm of possibilities, a whole new realm of security. You can avoid all of the data leakage because even if I provide you access to the content, you're not physically getting it and transferring it to you. It's a little bit the same as what's the difference between renting a movie on VHS and looking at the same movie on Netflix. Well, VHS, you can copy the tape. If you're looking at Netflix, way more difficult to try to capture that IP and then try to move it around. It's a lot more work.
Yeah, for sure. I guess I'm kind of curious when you guys and maybe more of an industry comment or question rather than anything specific to you all. But when you do send out this aggregated data, right? Is there ability to access it on an individual user basis? Can you break it down further? Is it anonymized, or how does that kind of work? Could you just get the top line statistics?
So let me take a step back. Okay? TickSmith doesn't sell data.
Yeah.
We sell the platform that lets you sell data. So if the yield decided that, hey, you know what, we have these data sets that we think could be interesting to this marketplace, it's basically you, the data owner, decides what data you want to make available. We provide everything to be able to take the content, transform it into products, show it, make it available, but the data is not transferred to Fixment, and we don't resell it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So yeah, no, thank you. I'm just talking more generally about, data overall. I think, obviously it's a topic that you probably have a lot of insight into. And I know a lot of people, it's what they think about every day now is like, what information of mine is out there? Moving on, when you kind of think about how data will be utilized looking forward, what are maybe some ways that data aren't currently being used, and maybe, how do you expect them to kind of be used going forward to help, again, further innovate?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's the concept of the data economy or infonomics, and what I envision, and I'm not the only one, of course, is that more and more people will, as they get a hold of their data, they'll realize the potential, A, for using it more internally, but B, the potential to be able to make that, to sell it to others, and A, make a profit from selling the content, and B, generate more activity for their main business. As a product, we have one customer. I don't know if I can do name dropping or talk about specific customers on your show.
I think that's for you. Yeah.
Okay, I'm happy. So one of our customers is the CME Group, the largest stock exchange group in the world. And if you go to our website, you'll see a quote from them that basically says that 50% of the customer base that they have started because their journey to become a customer by downloading some data. Okay. So how do I get to know more about a company, its services? Is it efficient or not? Is it something I can use? Well, already if I can access some of the data and check them out that way, it's a good way to get started, at least in capital markets. And we expect that it's the same in just about every vertical. In addition to also saying, I can use this data and I can use it to refine my business, whatever it is, whether it's a transaction and investment thesis, or it is trying to improve some workflow in a factory somewhere.
And then, so, just kind of along that, point, I guess I'm kind of curious, do you guys just operate in the US and Canada? Are you guys operating globally?
No, we have presence in Europe, US, and Canada, and we operate globally. We support our solutions 24/7. We just signed today a contract with a firm in Estonia, which is our first Estonian customer. Very happy about that. But otherwise, our customers will be in North America, Europe, Canada, US.
What are some of the challenges working kind of across all these different jurisdictions?
As a smaller firm, it's just having enough people to be able to cover the different time zones. I think that is the biggest challenge. We have discussions with firms like Australia, Hong Kong, etc., and it's just the time differences sometimes make it a bit more difficult. But that's more on the business side. When you start talking on the operation side, everything gets set up for 24/7. So you can be located anywhere as long as it actually is on this planet, then you should be good.
But are there any jurisdictional differences as far as the business model and what, again, who you're able to partner with, or the types of data that you're able to, again, help facilitate the distribution of?
No, data is data, and the idea, and it is a complex problem. But what do you do for a complex problem is we try to simplify it as much as possible. And I like to think that in the future, data will be perceived the same as any other goods. Okay. Today, I want a new pair of running shoes. I can go to a large retailer. The running shoe manufacturer might have his own stores. Well, why not the same for data? If there's data that needs to be sold, that exists, and it is specific, then you should be able to put it on a virtual shelf in a number of places and try to sell it as widely as possible. But ultimately, it's just trying to simplify it so people don't see it as a concept problem anymore. That's all behind the scenes.
Very interesting. And then you mentioned sort of at the onset, your career first started off in kind of charting and providing technical, or at least some software for technical analyses. Just kind of curious, we talk with and deal with investors quite often, and certainly there's always two camps of fundamental versus technical analysis. Just kind of curious, with your background in technical and charting, what do you think some of the benefits are of using tools like charting and technical analyses?
Well, what's the idea? The idea is always to try to find a pattern. Patterns bring predictability. If you say, here, if I see this happening again and again and again, then I have an edge because I can anticipate. Patterns exist with different, if you're doing prop trading, and you might be looking for patterns in nanosecond timescales. If you're using fundamentals, you'll be looking at patterns that might be in spans in years. So it's based on your investment thesis, it's based on how you want to do things, but it's all fundamentally the same, just at different scales.
That's interesting. I mean, do you think people would be, again, part of it's around the investment thesis, part of it is around, how else you think about making investments, but generally speaking, do you think people would be better off using more of a technical approach, or at least a foundational approach in technical analysis, or do you think in the long run it doesn't really matter?
I personally think it doesn't really matter. It's either you have an affinity for math and you prefer to use technical analysis, you're more comfortable with that, or it could be the other way around. You might try to find some patterns by looking at some more complex sequences. What affects the price of a microchip manufacturer that's dependent on copper? And can you actually link back copper that's used there back to the distribution network, back to the producer, back to then shipping companies, unions for the workers that work in the mines, etc. And if you can link all of these things together, and if you can say, here, you know what, when we know that when there's these types of social unrest in, I think it's Argentina or Chile, which is a large copper producer, and if we see this pattern of social unrest, then here is the ripple effect that ultimately might actually affect the pricing of the commodity on an exchange, and might even affect some of the firms using it. It happens, it repeats itself, it involves math figuring it out, but the more data points you can put in, then the more likely you'll find something that you can use to your advantage.
Yeah, that's very helpful for a lot of people, I believe. So thinking back, to TickSmith, right now I think it's a lot of, I imagine, you're facilitating really for sort of B2B type transactions. You mentioned kind of the shelf concept. Does that become more B2C where, individuals can come and start really getting access to large swaths of data and start, again, applying it to either their own investments or also, again, some of their own initiatives, whether that's building or starting a business and the like?
I'd say it's primarily B2B, simply because for individuals to start using that more at scale, you have to either simplify the AI machine learning products back to the level of an individual retail user, which is not really the case today. Who buys data today that we've seen? I mean, it's anything from investors, firms that rely on the products represented by the data. I go back to my commodity exchange example. Farmers go and buy small data sets to figure out, here, I'm growing soy. And what happened in the past on soy? What's all the data related to soy? Can it help me? I mean, a farm is a business. So it's still B2B. But as more and more data is made available, as more and more usage of data is made available, then it is going to go to retail. I do think like the concept of open banking, for example, is going to educate a whole lot of people on what data they themselves individually represent, how it moves around, and then how they can even then personally eventually leverage that data to sell it or make some money around it.
Very interesting. And then, so when you guys, there's obviously a lot of different trends out there now. Certainly some of the data that I think your help working with, like, does any of it pertain to some of the emergences of blockchain, NFTs, or anything along those lines? Are there any practical use cases there?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, if you look at blockchain, if you look at especially cryptocurrencies, and the rise of the use of crypto as a standard financial product, it suddenly means that there's a whole lot of institutions that are looking at that. So those are some of the data sets that we're working with firms to make available more widely. But it's literally any type of data. But I'd say right now, some of the big teams in finance, everything related to crypto, blockchain, everything related to ESG data as well. I mean, ESG is coming down. There's regulation. There's a whole number of players trying to figure out how to position themselves. There's a whole number of players and new players with new products and new ways of looking at things. There's no standards or common standards yet, and that is all going to evolve through time. But today, there's a lot of that that's public. So crypto, ESG, I think are the ones that come up the most often as quote unquote new types of data that are interesting for the industry.
And then, so, as a co-founder and CEO, and think about obviously, some of the risks involved with any business, what sort of keeps you up at night?
Keeps me up. Managing growth. I mean, making sure we stay on top of things, getting the message across. I'd say the biggest challenge that we have is that it's a new field. The whole concept of having an out-of-the-box solution, and there's a few other firms now offering that as well, but it's still new. My biggest competition is actually firms that think they have to build it themselves because they don't know that you can get something out of the box out there. I jest sometimes and say, you know what, in the mid 90s, a lot of companies decided that, this email thing is interesting and started coding their own email servers. Okay? Who would buy an email? Who would code an email server today? So what came along after? Well, the standard email server, the Microsoft Outlook and the IBM Symphony,
Lotus Notes, yeah.
Lotus Notes, and all of these things, and then the cloud-based versions and equivalent. But through all of this today, if we say, hey, we'd like to use email in this company, and I don't think anybody will ever have the reflex or say, oh, we need to build this. And my biggest challenge is to say, here, you don't need to spend years on a project to try to build an infrastructure that's specific to your own firm. The problem you have, everybody else has. And guess what? There's now standard solutions that can help you solve that problem and move on and concentrate on business issues and other things.
Oh, very cool. So Francis, we're actually just about at time. I want to turn it back over to you to see if there's anything else that we didn't get a chance to talk to that you would have liked to have.
No, well, first, I'd like to thank you for inviting me on the show. I mean, it's a very interesting conversation that we're having. We're going through a revolution with computers that is, I guess, bigger than the Industrial Revolution that happened 2 centuries ago. That makes us feel old. But we're really just starting to see that revolution touch data and data exchanges and simplifying in a secure manner, really simply how I can take data on the left, make it available on the right, so it can really be utilized by all the parties. And that is very, very, very exciting. It's changing our lives. And it is also the newer generations and the younger people. That's what they'll be living with that we didn't have 10, 15, 20 years ago.
No, that's exciting. I mean, certainly we've seen the proliferation across the board of, metadata and how big these data pools can get and really inform smart, helpful things, right? Even as simple as analyzing, how to protect cities versus, future climate changes or the like. So certainly something exciting for.
Exactly. And those are like big domain use cases, like how do we protect the planet? But as they become more and more generic, more used, more refined, it's going to boil down where an individual will start doing that. One last comment. Everybody remembers the quote from an IBM CEO years and years and years ago that says, "I don't think there's room for more than 3 or 4 computers in the world today." Okay. Now, with our cell phones, even people who say, "I don't have a computer," they still actually have a computer. They still use it on a daily basis. But it's simpler, it's usable, and they don't even know you're using a computer. So that's where we're going to, but on the data side.
No, that's great. That's really insightful stuff. And Francis, thank you so much again for taking the time to have a conversation with us. I know I appreciated it. For everyone else and all of our listeners, to listen to other episodes of The Yield, please visit and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Spotify. For any questions on Yieldstreet, please visit www.yieldstreet.com or email us at investments@yieldstreet.com. Thanks so much.
Perfect. Thank you very much.